Welcome everybody. I hope I hope to keep you awake after the lunch that you've all had. Today we're going to talk about threat intelligence, but also some stuff about vulnerabilities and maybe some of the trends in the cybersecurity market. This is me. If anybody wants to connect, great. If you've got a question you don't want to ask in here, feel free to reach out. How many of you know who eset are? Well, some of you are carrying eset bags. I would have thought we're a bag manufacturer. No, come on.
And you have a sideline in cybersecurity.
Yes, no. Just to give you a feel for who we are, we're a cybersecurity company. We are historically an AV company, now in EDR and threat intel. But you might already use some of our technology or be aware of our technology. Anybody in here have an Android phone? Somebody must do, yeah. We scan all the apps prior to them being listed. So we're a Google partner and we do that on it. So you can think the mass scale of that. We're also an Intel partner, so the vPro chipset, we utilize the ransomware in TDT on the vPro chipset with Intel. So they can pass telemetry back to us on what's happening on the chipset back into our software. So one of a few partners. And we do some intelligence sharing. So we're a JCDC partner with CISA in the US, very specifically around, for example, the conflict in Ukraine. We share some intelligence with the US government on critical infrastructure, what's happening around the world, etc. So hopefully that gives you some sort of credibility of who eset are. It seems wrong not to start any presentation where you're talking about threat intelligence with, MGM and Caesar's Palace, because they're two of the most probably big hacks recently. And interestingly, both social engineering attacks. One on a third party and one directly. Now, the interesting part about these attacks is one paid and one didn't. If you look at the SEC filings, it's quite interesting to see how Caesars went through the process and did their SEC filing, etc. But the interesting part about this is, it's a month after Black Hat and DEF CON. So did anybody attend Black Hat or DEF CON? Anybody in here? See, if I did that in the US, half the people are going to put their hand up and turn and say, yeah. I reckon the phishing emails to cybersecurity people are going to get really interesting. Because if you know the invoice number, which bars they frequented, which restaurants they frequented in Vegas, because they're all owned by MGM and Caesars. So there's a lot of rich data in here. So I'm sure it was no coincidence that actually these hacks happened after a major security conference. Not that I'm suggesting anybody at the conference did it, but the richness of data that actually you're going to glean about the entire cybersecurity industry is sitting right in those two hacks. Which is something I think very few people have really linked joined the dots up on. Anyway, back to our subject. So the need for more intelligence. Well, we all need more intelligence. Well, sorry, I should speak for myself. I always need more intelligence, but I'm sure you'd agree we could all do with more intelligence. But let's start with why. The cost of cybercrime. Back in 2018, it was estimated cybercrime cost business around $1.5 trillion. This was an estimate by Dr. Michael Maguire of University of Surrey. And he did a global report. And it was the first time somebody had put a global number on this. The NCSC will talk about the UK and the FTC will talk about the US, etc. But nobody had actually tried to estimate this globally. If you look at the World Economic Forum then, the Global Risk Report, 2 years later, re-estimated this to be $6 trillion. So most of us are from commercial companies. How many companies had a 4x increase in potential revenue or opportunity in 2 years? It's none. There are no commercial companies that have this opportunity, but cyber criminals do. So this is why we need, why everything needs to be smarter. And if you look at where this goes, Cyber Ventures estimate 10.5 and Statista estimate 13.8, all within a few years. So you can see this is only going in one direction. And when we start talking about ransomware, if we go back to my Caesar's Palace example right at the start, the year of ransomware was 2021. Yeah? And we saw the largest payout in 2021 was CNA Financial, amusingly a cyber risk insurer in the US. Yeah, I mean, you see the irony of that. Yeah, and was the payout so big that they actually agreed not to go after the companies that were insured by CNA Financial? Yeah, you know, there might be other reasons why that payout was so large. The largest demand of that year was $240 million, which was actually on a European company, MediaMarkt, a retailer in Germany. Yeah, so this was the year of ransomware. I think we can all agree this. Chainalysis, who monitor the blockchain for potential ransomware payments, estimate the revenue that went to ransomware crypto wallets that year was just under $1 billion, as you can see. And then in 2022, you had, if you think about this, you had Colonial Pipeline, you had a White House executive order, you had consortiums and summits around the world about getting rid of ransomware and cybercrime groups, etc. And there was a lot of law enforcement activity, a lot of activity in actually stopping this. And you had conflict in Ukraine, which also disrupted it, is probably the best term. And it went down under $500 million. So are we winning? It's a good question, isn't it? Does anybody think it goes up or stays level or go down? Right. First half of this year. Yeah, we're back to where we were in 2021. But it doesn't seem to have the same level of motivation to do something. You don't see any more executive orders. You don't see any more big articles, summits happening again. But if you look at the prediction of where this ends up at the end of this year, we're back at 2021 levels. So this isn't going away, it's only increasing, because if I was running a cybercrime ransomware as a service group, I would still, I'm not going to stop working, because why would I? Yeah, and you have to remember that these people are in business. These are not people in the back of a garage wearing a hoodie. They're coming to an office. They have a campaign manager. They have affiliate programs. They have support teams. Yeah, they likely all come into an office. They probably have vacation and healthcare benefits. Who knows? I mean, but it's not as dark and maybe dingy as we all think it probably is. At the same time, you've got the cyber insurance industry. Now, this is more of a US thing. Does anybody here have cyber risk insurance? Right. So I live between the two countries. In the US, half the room would put their hand up. Right. This is something that's coming your way. Yeah, because companies want to insure against the risk. Yeah, and it makes sense. And it's not just about the risk, it's about the process of the risk as you go. So, for example, if you have an incident, the insurer will provide you the forensic teams, the legal teams, etc., etc. So you've got this entire process that comes in on the back of it. And that's what the company is actually insuring against, as well as ransomware payouts, loss of business, and all those sorts of things. This particular industry took a real hit in 2021 when suddenly you saw this ramp up of ransomware demands and payouts. This is kind of a double-edged sword for me, because they're funding cybercrime and also making everybody put in great security. So, I mean, the security requirements are a good thing, yeah. But at the same time, they're also allowing companies to fund cyber criminals. But if you look at premium revenue, if you look at 2022, whereas in 2021 they were making a loss, they increased their requirements, they increased what they were doing. Premiums doubled, yeah. But there were still 27,000 claims in the US alone. Now, I will say this is an 80-20 rule. About 80% of these are business email compromise. So the minor number is ransomware demands. But business email compromise is the most significant cyber crime in the US. I don't know whether that's true in the UK. But now more to our about threat intelligence and where the threat landscape. This is a quote from our Chief Research Officer in our threat report at the end of the first half of this year. And what he actually said was that there's a change. So we all understand most cybercrime starts with phishing. Yeah? But he said there's a change coming that actually its exploitation of vulnerabilities is growing. And that's an interesting statistic, get my words out. He also talked about authentication and credential theft as well. And if we look at the value of credentials, so anybody here have an RDP server? Somebody must do. Yeah, a few people have got RDP. Yeah, credential theft. If somebody actually manages to steal one set of credentials, what happens to them? Well, they go on to. How many people here have actually been on the dark web? And that's interesting. Only ever a few people put their hand up. We're in the cybersecurity industry, and people don't go on the dark web. If you go there, you can buy credentials. Yeah, you can buy credentials for somebody's PayPal account. You can buy a Netflix account. You can buy, however, network access credentials as well at the same time. Now, how much do they sell for? There are certain companies that actually track the dark web at credential selling, and they sell for about $2,500 to $3,000 per set of credentials, as long as they're admin credentials. And they last about 1.6 days for sale. So this is a fast turnover business. I get the credentials, I need somebody to buy them and abuse them before somebody realizes they've been stolen, or before somebody resets them. So it's a very quick process. And of course, most of them are RDP or VPN access. Yeah? So this is what happens when somebody puts in, when somebody gives away that password, it's $2,500 to $3,000 worth each time. Yeah? Now, for comparison, if somebody steals your PayPal account, it's roughly 15% value of the value of your PayPal account at that moment in time. So if you've got $1,000 sitting in a PayPal account, it will sell on the dark web for about $150. Yeah? And if when somebody buys it, you've already changed the password, they get a refund and get another account. Yeah, because they ring the support desk and ask for another one. So I'm just pointing out, when somebody says this is not business, no, this is very much business. Yeah. So if we look at the number of vulnerabilities, vulnerabilities are a big growing issue. If we look at the number of vulnerabilities on the CVE database, this is going in one direction. I apologize, this year, I took this stat in January. Yeah. This is already way up there for this year. Now there's lots of reasons why this might have this trend. And one of the reasons could well be there's more software, there's more devices, so therefore there's more vulnerabilities. We're getting better at finding them as a cybersecurity industry, so good researchers are finding them and flagging them. Yeah. Or it means people are writing more vulnerabilities into code. Now, I'm an ex-programmer and I never wrote a bug in my code. Yeah, so I'm just pointing that out. They need to learn better. Who knows? But what the vulnerability marketplace unfortunately they have value. So if we look at the value, the bug bounty program, anybody ever have a bug bounty program running? Any of you vendors? Well, most vendors have bug bounty programs where you pay somebody if they find a vulnerability. Yeah? And typically payments can be around $10,000, $15,000. You disclose the vulnerability, they accept that it's a vulnerability, they create a patch, and off we go again. Yeah? But there's a marketplace that runs alongside of this. But if you look, Apple will pay you around $2 million if you find something in lockdown mode. So on the iPhone, you can, if you're a high-risk target, you can put your phone into lockdown mode, which basically firewalls your phone from everything. Somebody finds a bug in that, it can be quite rich. Cryptocurrency exchanges will pay you large amounts of money, Google and Microsoft, etc. But the bug bounty marketplace is looking like it's going to go from $300 million. Within a few years, it's going to go to $5 billion. Now, why? Why are companies suddenly going to have to start increasing paying for bug bounty programs? And that's because there is another marketplace that runs alongside. Yeah? There's somebody else buying, yeah? Which is causing part of the whole reason why there's such an issue with vulnerabilities and why you hear about so many 0 days. Now, if I go out and sell, I discover a vulnerability, find one this afternoon, and I want to go off and sell it, I could go to the dark web and I can try and sell it. And I'll get 10, maybe 100 times more than I would have done in a bug bounty program. So suddenly it's worth my while going onto the dark web. Now there's an issue with this. Black market transactions typically have a middleman. So if we were selling narcotics or arms, you'd have somebody sitting in the middle. And I would be anonymized by the fact I've got my middleman selling. Not true in vulnerability transactions. On the dark web, I go on with my vulnerability, I sell it to the buyer directly. So therefore, I don't have that anonymous transaction. Also, the buyer doesn't, because there's a direct connection between the two. But I could get a lot more money selling it this way. Just out of interest, if somebody found a vulnerability, are they selling it or are they disclosing it? What would you be doing, guys? Yeah, I'm just asking. Yeah, I know the man at the back's filming. Yeah, there's another marketplace as well, the grey market, and this is maybe more concerning. The grey market here is where you do have a broker. So we go, we leave here this afternoon. You find a vulnerability. If you can create a proof of concept of exploit. So you don't actually need to have written the exploit, but prove that the vulnerability could be exploited, then you could take this to a broker, and the broker will pay you for it. And the broker will then go and sell it to someone else. And therefore you've created that anonymous transaction. Now who's the buyer in this scenario? Nation states. Nation states are the main purchaser of vulnerabilities in this market. So your governments are actually purchasing them, yeah, and stockpiling 0 day vulnerabilities. So I'm just pointing out this is why suddenly this marketplace is going from 300 million in bug bounties to 5 billion, because the people finding the vulnerabilities have 2 other markets where they can actually go sell them, which is causing, how many people spend their entire life doing vulnerability and patch management? Yeah, that's part of cybersecurity, isn't it? And a big part of it, unfortunately. Which is also why 62% of vulnerabilities are first exploited at 0 days. Because there's a transaction. There's a transaction with cyber criminals to actually go out and buy them. The broker scenario, by the way, is done by legitimate companies. Registered companies. Zerodium, which is the example I used there, has an office near Washington, DC. Yeah, they're a legitimate company. So I'm just saying it somewhat feels wrong, doesn't it? So what's the solution? Well, better threat intelligence, tool sets. There's lots of hype. There's lots of tools out there. There's lots of vendors. In fact, they're all downstairs, aren't they? Yeah, including us. Yeah. But there's lots of tool sets. But it's also about people. And I think we forget that. You've just had the AI summit here in the UK up at Bletchley Park. AI is a big thing. Is it going to get rid of all of us? Or according to Elon Musk, it's going to get rid of everybody's job, including his. But it's not. AI is only part of the solution. The tool set is part of the solution. Human expertise is the other part of the solution, and that's not going away. So if you look at the traditional stack, you start off with the operating system. And then next-gen AV, and I say next-gen AV, what I really mean is AV that uses behavioral and AI technologies, or machine learning technologies, if to be precise, behind it to do detection. So you end up with this stack. So where does threat intelligence live in this stack? Where do we actually end up with? And then you've got encryption, multi-factor authentication, so you've got your additional stack layer in here. EDR, MDR, XDR, yeah. Suddenly we've got this, so you've gone from prevention through to monitoring, yeah, because EDR is in effect post-event, because somebody has already got in and you need to know what they're doing. You need to look for the anomalies in traffic or the IOCs, etc. So you're at a different point in time. Threat intelligence sits on the top of this stack, or currently sits on the top of this stack. Because what you actually need to understand is what techniques and tactics people are using. How are they exploiting, for example, those vulnerabilities? What are they doing? When they get in, where did they go? Not only where did they go, but what were they doing while they were there? How did they cover their tracks, etc. You need to understand all these things. So what do we mean by intelligence? Well, there are coffee shops in town, aren't there? Yeah? I mean, that's a fair statement, isn't it? But the intelligence is not about specifically there are coffee shops in town, because that's a statement of fact. Yeah? I'm quite picky about my coffee, so now I want to know which one has the best roasted beans. I want to know which one roasts them each morning and which ones of them are fresh. I want to know which ones are open, which ones do I need a reservation at, which ones has cake, and cookies, which ones have music and entertainment. So suddenly, if I put all this together and I ask locals and I go out and gather this information, that's my intelligence. And that's the same in cybersecurity. It's no good just understanding, yes, there's a threat. You need to understand all the details behind the threat. You need to have that metadata that sits behind that intelligence. So what is cyber threat intelligence? Well, let's decline, it's three things. Let me build this slide. It's data, speed, and accuracy. So it's about having the data of what the threat is, but in fact, I think I used this term with my colleague over here the other day. It's like having intellectual property for a day. You understand there's a risk, so you have a piece of data about a threat. And as a cybersecurity vendor, it's very, very short-lived. Because the day I have that piece of intelligence, and the bad guy knows I've got this piece of intelligence, and they're going to modify what they're doing, but you need to be protected in that window. So it's like intellectual property for maybe 24 to 48 hours. So the data is important, which is why the speed is important. And the other piece that's important here is the accuracy. And the reason I say that is because if suddenly I tell you here's a threat, and this is what you need to be looking for in your network, and the speed is there, so I get it to you quickly, what you don't want to do is then spend those 48 hours removing the false positives. Because if that's what you end up doing, or ignoring the alerts because there are so many alerts, the feed wasn't curated enough. It wasn't accurate enough to actually make it meaningful. So that's what threat intelligence really should be. Now I say should be because I've met a lot of people recently. We've been running roundtables about threat intelligence, and I've met a lot of people who, too many alerts, we ignore it, or because what they've done is they're taking public feeds, which I'll come back to in a moment, and the noise level is wrong, because you end up with too much data happening. So why is cyber threat intelligence important? Well, it's about prevention. So, for example, what about IOCs? In fact, I've met some people who just digest IOCs into their environment, into their existing environments. Now, interestingly, I sat through another vendor's presentation recently at another conference who gave a presentation about taking ESET's research and how to take our research, because we're primarily a research company, not a product company, taking our research and building it into their product on a timely basis. So I'm just saying that you can get this from different places, but it's about the prevention, so understanding before something happens, taking that information in. So it's about prevention. It's about investigation of an incident. Because what happens if suddenly you take some intelligence and you actually find that you're already a victim? So then it's about understanding what's gone on and how to mitigate against that threat. And more to the point, we often hear, sometimes you'll hear about a cyber incident 2 or 3 days after it happens. Sometimes people leave the cyber incident running because the forensic data you collect could be useful to law enforcement, or it's more useful to the company to understand exactly how that's actually playing out. Because if you watch the once you know they're there, if you watch what they're doing, then you might actually learn something from where they've been and what their intent was. And like I say, law enforcement will often ask you sometimes not to shut it down that quickly. And of course, there's non-technical benefits to threat intelligence. Now, the SEC, how many people follow the US SEC rulings on disclosure? If any of you work for a listed company and you're listed in the US, you have to report to the SEC if you have a cyber incident. Non-technical benefits, yeah. Threat intelligence provides you the risk element that you have to report to the stock exchange as a company. So there's an element of reporting in here as well. Now, I know the UK exchanges don't do that. The SEC have only just implemented it, but I can guarantee, give it 12 months, and stock exchanges here are going to implement something similar. So where does it fit? Well, it's before incident, during incident, and after incident, obviously, and there's different levels of threat intelligence. So it goes all the way from an analyst all the way up to that board level. So threat intelligence in its right form, i.e. somebody taking a feed into a SOC, is down at that analysis end. But actually a report covering APT activity over the last 3 weeks or whatever, and specific threats to a certain sector or category, yeah, is definitely at the board level. Yeah. So your threat intelligence has to cover all. Now it also needs to cover geographically as well. So do you go out and buy one set of threat intelligence and go, I've got it, it's done, yeah, tick? Yeah, no. You actually have to map it, understand where that vendor's getting their intelligence, and actually where it fits in the geography, where your business is in that geography, and whether you need to go and complement it with another set of threat intelligence. Good example of that is if you're a company based here and have manufacturing in China, I can guarantee you need to go and get threat intelligence in China from a Chinese company, because very few Western companies would have good threat intelligence on what happens within China. So there's a good example of why you'd need more than one vendor. So who benefits? Well, obviously the people that are using the tools, various roles, but let's skip some of this. I'm conscious of your time. Where does it come from? There are different sources. So there are free sources that you can actually go out and get threat intel. I said some people have done this and they find that they ignore it. What you can do is kind of turn on the fire hose of threat intelligence feeds. So there are public sources out there where you can turn this on and bring this in. But the problem is it's too noisy. Unless you have large teams of researchers that are going to actually sit there and curate the intelligence feed that comes in down to what actually affects you, then you will ignore it. Yeah. However, go back to my cyber insurance comment earlier on. If your cyber insurer tells you you need a threat intelligence, you need to be taking threat intelligence. In fact, NIST now, I think, and ISO 27001, isn't it? Both require EDR and threat intelligence. So, or recommend it. So if you're going down this path, it's not a tick box. Don't turn around and take a public feed and then turn and say, I've got it, because you're just going to end up creating lots and lots of noise for your support teams. What does ours look like? Well, we have 6 different feeds, yeah, and in normal formats, and somebody will take these in to their SOC or their SIEM. Yeah, but more importantly, where does it come from? Yeah, I think this is the important part of this. Is firstly, it comes from our telemetry. Now, remember that first slide that I showed you about where we sit in the industry and who we have partnerships with. And then we're a global company, and we have around 110, 120 million endpoint sensors, i.e. people running our endpoint software, all around the world. So that telemetry provides you good intelligence. Now I say this because you see a startup suddenly appear and turn and say, we're in the threat intelligence industry. But where do you get your intelligence if you don't have the base for intelligence? You're probably getting it from public source, which isn't the best place to actually get curated intelligence. So you get that intelligence from that source, and then at the other end of that, and you can see there's open source and honeypots and such like in this slide here, And then at the other end of that, what you want is a set of analysts at the threat intelligence company sitting down and actually curating it. Say, before I give this to you, I want to make sure it's a real threat. I actually want to give you the background on it, the other pieces of data that you're going to need within that intelligence. And if you've then got a question on something, you come back to me in turn and say, I've got this in my environment, or it's identified something in my environment. Can you explain exactly what, more detail on the threat? You want access to the analyst. Yeah, not necessarily the company. You want to talk to the person who did the underlying research or the validation of that piece of intelligence. So, as much as we want to AI is going to fix the world, isn't it? Yeah, in cybersecurity, it's not, because actually at the end of it, you need human expertise to complement the automation. Yeah, and that's a very, very important part of it. We also produce threat research reports, so APT reports. These come out in several different forms, board level, specific incident, monthly summaries, and are aimed at different people in the organisation. So a summary is a good board level document. I mentioned the SEC rules earlier on. The SEC is a good example because the SEC requires you to have or doesn't require you, they recommend you have a cybersecurity person on your board. Some forms of this report would be good for that person, and some other reports would be good for the analysts. I'm not going to tell you about eset. Yeah, you can come and talk to my colleagues downstairs on our booth. The only thing I'll leave you with is we publish all our research. Yeah, so we are an endpoint company, an EDR and EDR and antivirus company. So we have a lot of endpoint protection in there. But we also are a research company, as I mentioned. Our founders started the company 30 years ago. We've never taken external funding. We're still run by our founders, which is unusual in this industry, and we're research focused. We publish our research on welivesecurity.com. So there's two websites. eset.com is for our products, welivesecurity.com is for our research. The reason I point this out is even if you don't use our products, when we publish a piece of research, it includes all the IOCs. Yeah? So even if you don't come and buy something from us, please benefit from our research. Yeah, and actually use the bits of information we put in the public domain. Obviously, I'd like you to come and buy our products as well. Yeah, yeah, for my colleagues in the room. Yeah, but make sure you subscribe to this. Yeah, so we do a lot of very interesting research around APTs, and as a European company, so we're based in Slovakia. We have a lot of in-depth research about Europe specifically. So it's more interesting, I think, for Europeans. And with that, I think I've run over by 2 minutes. Yeah, the man at the back saying yes. Yeah. So thank you for listening. But has anybody got any questions? Yes.
I just wanted to know, how do you go beyond the signature base? Because the intelligence is all about learning about the environment and the data that you already have.
Right, so I think, let me break your question down slightly further. How do you go beyond signature-based?
Because my understanding is all about the data, the correlation of the data, learning about what's normal, what's abnormal.
Yeah.
But how we go about 0 day, something that you haven't had?
Well, so for example, and I'm going to put a product hat on slightly, so I apologise because I don't typically talk about our products. So for example, if something comes into our endpoint product, firstly we have some machine learning capability on the device itself. So it'll have an AI behavioural heuristic element on the device itself. But realistically, if it's something that we've not seen before, which is your 0 day, and something we're unsure about, how do you then actually interrogate that or actually see what it's doing before you execute it on the device? What we would do is actually pass that back to our cloud system, and we would investigate that in the cloud system and then return it to the client. So we do a cloud scan in it. And at that stage, we may well start it in a VM, in a sandboxed environment and actually interrogate it in a different way. We might actually let it run in the sandbox. in the cloud, yeah, and then return the result back to the client. Yeah. So it's not signature. This theory of, when people talk about next-gen AV, yeah, I can tell you now, there is no AV vendor that's signature-based. I mean, we all have signatures, but there's no AV vendor that just does signatures. And nobody has been since 2006. Because if you look at the explosion of unique samples of malware, between 2005 and 2006, I think it went from like 400,000 to 6 million. There was no way you could do this by signatures. So everybody implemented some form of heuristic or behavioral analysis. Yeah. So when people talk about this next gen, it's not so next gen. We just didn't talk about it as an industry. Yeah. So I would term our stuff at next gen, yeah, to use that hype. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, and everybody's still awake. Thank you. Yeah. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.